Morning, guys.
Morning.
We are going to be talking today about, as Mark shared there, affair-proofing your marriage, subtitled Replacing the Patterns That Put Your Marriage at Risk. And as I was looking for a film clip this morning or this week, there was nothing I really found that really said what I wanted it to say. So rather than putting up something just to put up something, I thought I'd share a bit of the story of my experience as a pastor and as a therapist for almost 50 years now. Why this topic? After nearly 50 years of working with couples, I've consistently seen 4 patterns emerge with couples that have experienced infidelity. In fact, on the way here, I was just thinking, gosh, how many couples have I seen over the last, like I said, almost 50 years? 20 as a pastor and almost 30 as a therapist. And I kept thinking of this person, and then this person, and then these, and these, and these, and these. And it's just been amazing how many couples that I've worked with that have fallen into this this destructive experience of infidelity. And so there are 4 consistent patterns that I've noticed over the years. First of all, affairs often happen in marriages no one expects. In other words, you look at that marriage and you say, man, I wish our marriage was like that. And then maybe a couple weeks later, a year later, 2 years later, you find out that there's been an affair and that they're getting a divorce. The friends never expect it, families never expect it, communities never expect it. A lot of times, and a lot of the people that I've worked with that I remembered on the way here were pastors or missionaries or leaders in the church, leaders in the community. Again, people that you never expect. Second, affairs are rarely planned. In other words, the people that have affairs don't typically plan to have an affair. The person involved, of my experience, it's mostly been men, but not always men. In fact, it's a lot harder to work with an affair that I've experienced where the woman has been unfaithful and the man has been faithful. That's a harder one to deal with. But the person involved in the affair is usually surprised by how it happened and how quickly it happened. And a lot of times they'll even feel like they've been a victim of the affair. Well, this wasn't what I was looking for. And all of a sudden they're involved in an affair and it seemingly came out of nowhere. So affairs are rarely planned. They happen in marriages that no one expects. Third thing I've noticed is affairs are far more destructive than expected. In other words, people think, well, if I have an affair, it isn't going to be that. My wife will be angry for a while, and then she'll get over it. And affairs touch everyone involved. They touch the spouse, they touch the children, they touch the family at large, they touch the community, they touch the friendships, they touch a church, and it just becomes so destructive and so harmful that people don't know who they should be friends with, they don't know what they should do. It just becomes a very destructive thing that takes years to get over, if they ever get over it. Fourth, affairs are almost always symptoms of deeper unaddressed issues. Marital patterns and habits that were either unnoticed over the years or quietly tolerated over the years. In other words, an affair isn't typically about lust. It's about something going on in our hearts, much deeper, that has been going on for years, that we just never addressed, that we never noticed, that we never thought was that big of a deal. And then all of a sudden, those things over the years converge and an affair happens. So our purpose then today, given that I want to protect my marriage from an affair, and I want to see you guys do the same, because you never know how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, unless you're aware of what is behind an affair. Then you can begin to protect yourself and your family, your marriage and your family from an affair. So our purpose today is to help affair-proof our marriages by addressing two key questions. First question, why do they happen? And the second question, what can I do to prevent an affair from happening? Under the first question, how do affairs happen? What we're going to see is this: affairs, like tornadoes, and they're destructive as tornadoes, but they also come about as tornadoes. They're like tornadoes, rarely occur without warning. They are typically the outcome of relational disconnects and emotional needs that have gone unmet in the marriage for years. And then what can we do to prevent an affair? What we're going to see next time is this: marital faithfulness is less about resisting temptation of another woman and more about intentionally nurturing an emotional and relational connection with your wife. And because it's a positive thing that you do to protect your marriage, it becomes a much more easy thing to deal with. If it's a negative, it's always harder dealing with a negative. But if it's not about avoiding the other woman, but it's about engaging your wife in ways that create a greater emotional, life-giving connection of hearts, then there's hope. And then you can do something, because when you're doing that, you're protecting yourself from an affair that would just seem like come out of nowhere. Okay? So why do they happen? What can we do to prevent it? So why does an affair happen? If you think about it, guys, the average guy doesn't wake up in the morning thinking this: what a great day to have an affair. No guy ever wakes up in the morning with that attitude. But yet, by the end of today, there will be thousands of men around our country today that will do exactly that. They got up this morning never thinking about having an affair, yet by the time they go to bed tonight, they will have had an affair. And the question is, why? How does that happen? Well, the answer is that an affair never happens in a vacuum. It just never comes out of nowhere. We're never just an innocent victim of an affair. There are things that we are doing, patterns that we have fallen into, habits that we have committed ourselves to, that all move us towards an affair. Every affair emerges out of a complex series of lifelong experiences and choices, learned relational patterns and habits, and innocent, unplanned moments. Guys, none of which may seem remotely related to an affair. In other words, these experiences and choices, they don't seem like they'd have anything to do with an affair. The learned relational patterns and habits, yeah, they might be uncomfortable or may not be what I want, but they have nothing to do with an affair. Innocent, unplanned moments, yeah, but they all come together, merge together to set us up and to make us vulnerable to an affair. In other words, again, an affair doesn't begin with the act of betrayal. They begin with certain, often subtle relational dynamics that over the years have slowly prepared our hearts to have an affair. And if that's true, then we need to understand what those relational dynamics are so that we can begin to address them. And if we learn how to address them, what can we do then, guys? We can begin to affair-proof our marriage. But if they're there and we fail to address them, what happens? We're setting ourselves up for what? An affair. Something that we never planned for, something that we never expect, something that we never want, but one day you wake up in the morning not planning to have an affair. By the time you go to bed that night, boom, something's happened. So, to answer that question, why did that happen? First thing we have to do is answer the question, what is the nature of an affair? What's the anatomy? How are they built? What's behind them? Well, while an affair is clearly a sinful act that breaks covenant with your wife and it defies God's good design for marriage, an affair is far more than a momentary lapse in moral behavior. So when a man has an affair, he sleeps with a woman, that's a sinful act. But what I'm saying is, it's more than just that. It's much more than just that. And if we're going to affair-proof our marriage, we have to understand what's behind the marriage, behind the affair that gets the man into the bed with another woman. Okay? So here's how I want you to think about an affair today. An affair is a symptom. It's a symptom. It's a sin, but it's also a symptom of chronic emotional disconnection within the marriage that sinfully seeks relief of that disconnection, that feeling of disconnection, through an illegitimate connection outside the marriage. So like a red light on your dashboard that tells you what? Something isn't right in the engine. An affair is telling you something isn't right where? In the marriage. Now, if all you're doing is I got to somehow get that red light to turn off, because that's the real problem and that's only the problem, and so you figure out how to unplug it so the red light doesn't show, what haven't you dealt with? What's going on in the engine? And the same way, if all you're concerned about is not having an affair or stopping an affair if you've had one, and all you're concerned about, how do I stop it, and you don't deal with the symptom of it, there's something going wrong in the marriage, you can stop it, but guess what? Because you haven't dealt with the real problem in the marriage, what's going to happen? You have another one and another one. Because once you have an affair, once you move from porn to an affair, porn never satisfies. You always got to go deeper and deeper and deeper. In other words, what I'm saying is this. An affair doesn't begin with the desire for another woman, but with a disconnection of your heart from your wife. Got it? It doesn't begin with desire for another woman. So it isn't like, I got to stop that desire. Now that's something you got to do, but the desire for another woman is just the red light on the dashboard. And the red light on the dashboard is pointing you towards something in the marriage. And what's it pointing you in the marriage? That there's a disconnection in your heart from your wife. And that's what needs to be addressed. Now, what do I mean when we talk about disconnection of the heart? An affair is always a symptom of a disconnection in our hearts from our wife. What do I mean by disconnection in our heart? Well, we got to go back to God's design for marriage in Genesis 1 and 2. And what we find is God's design for marriage is a connection of the hearts. God designed marriage, Genesis 2:24, to be a deep, emotional, spiritual, and relational one-flesh connection. You leave father and mother and cleave to your spouse, and the two become what? One flesh. The idea of one flesh has to do with connection. It's a connection of body, it's a connection of souls, it's a connection of the hearts, it's a connection of the emotions. And whenever there's connection in God's universe, in God's creation, there's life. Whenever there's disconnection in God's universe, there's death. When an egg and a sperm come together, there's life. If they don't come together, there's death. A tree and the branch and the root. When they're connected together, there's life. When they disconnect, there's death, right? It's the same thing in marriage. A marriage is made for the connection of heart, and when the man's heart and the woman's heart are connected together in this one flesh relationship, the marriage becomes a life-giving relationship. And you feel alive, you feel good, you feel joy, you feel fullness of life, because that's how God created it to be. Now, this heart-level connection between husband and wife is meant to reflect God's life-giving intimacy, self-giving love, and transcendent purposes. In other words, like the Spirit, or like God is Trinity, one God, yet three distinct separate persons, so are we in marriage, one flesh, but two distinct separate persons. And yet what God we see in the Trinity is this life-giving unity, self-giving love, and transcendent purpose. Father and Son and Spirit share all those things. And what God wants in every marriage is not only that it's life-giving, but it has this life-giving intimacy that is built off of self-giving love and a transcendent purpose. And that's what marriage is about. Now, when a couple's connection is strong, their hearts are drawn together, their marriage experiences vitality, purpose, joy, and life. However, when that connection is weak, their marriage will feel distant, empty, meaningless, and dead. In fact, there are a lot of couples that they look good and everything looks good in terms of being a couple. Their lives are fine, their families are fine, everything is going good, and yet there's no connection. It's like they have a railroad track marriage. They're living parallel lives, but they never connect together. And so while everything can be nice and good in the marriage, look good, guess what? If there's no connection, there's no life. And so they're just going along to get along, and maybe that's what all they feel that marriage should be. A nice life, but no connection. Now, the reality of every marriage is that disconnection is part of every marriage. Disconnection in a marriage is inevitable. Why? Because the man and the woman, every man and every woman that have ever been married or are married are what? We're fallen people. And fallen people disconnect from each other. Okay? So disconnection is inevitable. Every marriage goes through seasons of disconnection where emotional closeness fades. You don't feel as close, you don't feel alive in your marriage as much as you used to due to busyness. You know, it's just a season of business, you got kids, you got all things going on at work, and you don't have that close connection, or neglect, you just don't take care of it. The marriage, unresolved conflict, lingering pain of unhealed wounds that you have within the marriage, all those will create seasons of disconnection, where you feel emotionally and spiritually and relationally distant from each other. The difference between a marriage that merely survives and one that truly thrives lies in a couple's ability to do three things. In other words, while every marriage will feel this disconnect, the difference between a marriage that survives and a marriage that thrives is three things. Number one, the marriage that thrives will recognize when emotional distance begins to form. A marriage that doesn't thrive, they won't notice that. It'll just be part of the ritual, part of the marriage. Second, they'll not only recognize it, but they'll respond with humility and with a genuine desire to reconnect. I realize that we're disconnected. I don't like this. This is not what I want. And we're going to do whatever it takes to do what? To come back together. Third, repair the disconnection with the necessary honesty, grace, vulnerability, confession, and forgiveness. So guys, that's why I said you respond with humility. Because to be honest about yourself, your part in the disconnect, to give grace to your spouse's part of the disconnect, to be vulnerable, to confess, to forgive, all of that is required to repair the disconnect. And what I'm saying is, while there will be disconnection in every marriage, the marriage that thrives, the marriage that is being protected against an affair, is a marriage that recognizes, responds, and repairs the disconnect. The marriage that doesn't recognize, respond, or repair, that marriage is ripe for an affair. For example, Let me just give you a picture of this. A thriving marriage will possess a redemptive rhythm that regularly recognizes, responds, and repairs the disconnection. So I'm taking these three ideas, recognizing, responding, and repairs the disconnection, and we're seeing that there's a rhythm that this marriage has. For example, a marriage will have life-giving connection through trust. Have a life-giving connection is to how God describes Adam and Eve in Genesis 2. They were naked and unashamed. They were totally open and they didn't hide. Now to do that, you have to be able to do what? To trust another person. That if I am naked, I'm not going to be shamed by you looking at me and saying there's something wrong with you. So there's an openness with vulnerability, but I trust you that allows me to be open. It's that openness that creates the connection. And it opens the heart. Now, something will happen, and there will be a painful disconnection through a rupture. A rupture can be a misunderstanding, it can be a sin, it can be something that one of you do to each other or something else that creates a disconnect, a rupture, where you pull in, the heart closes, and you no longer trust. Trust is broken. And to the degree of the rupture will be the degree of what? The level of mistrust. And you know what an affair does to trust, guys? Betrayal of your spouse. There's nothing greater. There's no depth of mistrust greater than what an affair will do. So you have the painful disconnection through rupture. But this is a redemptive rhythm, so what's the next thing? Well, needed reconnection through repair. And this is where you recognize the disconnect. This is where you respond to the disconnect with your spouse. And this is where you do what you need to do with each other to repair it. And when you do that, that requires a humbling of your heart. And once your heart is humbled and you recognize, respond, and repair, what happens? Well, you have that life-giving connection again, because trust that was broken is restored, and now it is there again in the marriage. And what I want you to see, this is a healthy redemptive rhythm that not only is to be part of our marriages, but it's also to be part of our relationship with God. Why? 1 John 1:9, if we say we have no sin, we make him a liar. But if we confess our sin, what? He forgives our sin and cleanses us from all unrighteousness. In other words, we have a life-giving connection with God. What happens when we sin? That connection is what? Broken. It's disconnected. But what does he say to do? Recognize, respond, and repair the disconnect that is caused by sin through what? Confession and repentance. And once we do that, what happens? The connection is restored. But is it always going to be restored, or are we going to sin again? Well, we'll sin again. So that's the rhythm. That's the redemptive rhythm that we have with God. And that if we're going to have a healthy relationship with our wives, we have to have with our wives as well. The absence of redemptive rhythm keeps a marriage stuck in chronic disconnection rather than returning to a state of marital connection. Because once you're in that place and you don't have a way to get out, you're not going to just kind of get out over time. You're going to just kind of get out passively. If you're in a state of disconnection, you have to actively work and act to repair the rupture. Otherwise, it just becomes something else you put under the carpet. And once you keep putting stuff under the carpet, what happens? The carpet turns into a wall between you and your spouse. So what is it then that keeps a marriage stuck in chronic disconnection? Because that's the problem. That's the thing that sets us up for an affair. It's not the other woman, it's the chronic disconnection that we have with our spouse. You may be here this morning and you feel disconnected from your spouse, but it isn't chronic. It's maybe something happened this past week, and you know what you need to do? Recognize it, react to it, and respond to it, repair it. And you go back into that. But some couples, some men, don't see that, don't recognize that, and don't respond to it. And that disconnect doesn't go away, it just gets deeper and wider. And its roots go down, and it becomes chronic. And it just now becomes a way of life in the marriage. So what keeps that there? Well, chronic marital disconnection is driven by two strong undercurrents. There are two things that are going on in a marriage that is chronically disconnected. The first one, there are unhealthy relational patterns that are part of the marriage. And the second one, there are unresolved relational deficiencies in the marriage. Now, when you have unhealthy relational patterns and unresolved relational difficulties, that will keep the marriage, those are two powerful currents that keep the marriage chronically disconnected. That then prepares the heart for an affair. It's that chronic marital disconnection comprised of unhealthy relational patterns, unresolved relational deficiencies that prepare your heart for an affair. Now, you can have a prepared heart here this morning. Does that mean you'll have an affair? No. A lot of guys live their whole lives with a prepared heart that's ripe for divorce, but they never have an affair. Why not? Because there are two other things that are necessary to have an affair. First one, a willing partner. Second one, time and opportunity. And if you have a prepared heart and you meet a willing partner and there's time and opportunity to have an affair, guess what you're going to do? You'll have an affair. See, that's why a lot of guys have a prepared heart and they think, I could never have an affair. I could never do that to my wife. I could never do that to my kids. And the only reason that you haven't done it is because there's not been a willing partner, or there's not been time and opportunity, or you've had time and opportunity but without a willing partner. A prepared heart, willing partner, time and opportunity are the three legs of a stool that you need for an affair. And so what I want you to see, it's these two undercurrents that work to keep a couple chronically disconnected at the level of the heart. Unhealthy relational patterns and unresolved relational deficiencies. So the question then is this: if these two undercurrents are the driving force behind chronic marital disconnection, and that's what prepares our hearts to have an affair, exactly what are these undercurrents? Right? That's a question to ask, right? So what are they? The first undercurrent, as we said, unhealthy relational patterns. These unhealthy relational patterns, how we're going to look at them today, manifest themselves in two common marital dances. Every couple dances a dance, whether they realize it or not. Most couples don't know the dance that they're dancing. But there are two common marital dances that manifest these unhealthy relational patterns. The second undercurrent, unresolved relational deficiencies, manifest themselves in 5 core marital needs that God created every marriage to meet, but they're going unmet. Okay? So it's important that we recognize these two undercurrents because they are what prepares our hearts to have an affair. So, let's look at the first undercurrent. Again, I said they manifest as two dances. The first dance is the dance of the conflict avoiders. I just want you to sit back and ask, is this the dance that I'm dancing with my wife? Okay? Conflict avoiders are couples who appear happy. They rarely yell, argue, or openly disagree. They just kind of get along. They're self-sacrificing individuals who strive to be a loving partner. We want to be good partners. I genuinely want to be a good partner to my spouse. They're often admired as the model Christian couple due to their nice, harmonious exterior. These are the people that you'd never think would have an affair. Why? They're just so great together. Why are they this way? Well, they fear that conflict will lead to a loss of control, emotional rejection, or abandonment. In other words, it's not out of love as it is out of what? Fear that something bad will happen if conflict arises. So guess what I got to do? I got to work to avoid conflict. They are deeply anxious about being perceived as anything other than nice or agreeable. Why? Well, because if I'm not nice, I'm going to be seen as a bad person, and if I'm a bad person, what? I might not be wanted, I might be rejected, and I don't want to have to deal with that. For them, peace is maintained not through honest, loving engagement, but through fearful suppression of thoughts, opinions, and feelings. I'm not going to share with you my feelings, I'm not going to share with you my opinions, and I'm not going to share with you my thoughts. Why? Because they might be different than yours, and then you might not like this, and you might get mad at me for having these, and you might walk away from me. Or challenge me, and I don't want to have to be challenged. So it's easier just to do what? Be quiet, not say anything. What's beneath the niceness? Their niceness is fueled more by fear than by love. So 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out fear. In other words, fear and love are like oil and water. They can't exist in the same place. Either you're going to live with your marriage out of love with your spouse, or it will be out of fear. But it can't be both. Because love casts out fear. What's beneath the niceness? It flows from emotional fragility and insecurity, not strength or secure connection. A couple that is conflict avoiders, they're not secure in their connection with each other. They feel very insecure, and so how they deal with that insecurity is they just don't talk. They don't talk about anything that would cause them to have a disagreement. Why? Because niceness protects them from harm. I can't be hurt if you disagree, if you find out something you don't like about me. My opinion, my thoughts, my feelings. So it protects them from harm, but it also prevents them from life-giving connection. Because you can only have connection when your hearts are open and vulnerable. And a conflict-avoiding couple, their hearts are closed and they don't trust each other. And so they get along, they live a railroad track marriage, doing nice things in the community, in the church, family, friends, everything. But they feel insecure with each other, so they learn just to close their hearts. And when you close your hearts, you feel safe, but guess what else then, guys, as I said? You prevent yourself from being connected to the other person. Now, where did conflict avoiders learn this dance? Where did they learn it? Well, 3 key places they learn it. As children that come together as adults in marriage, they've learned it primarily, first of all, from their childhood. From childhood environments where conflict or disagreement or having feelings that you felt other than feelings that were different from mom or dad's were unsafe, explosive, or punished. If you had a thought or an opinion that was different than from your family's, maybe you were punished for that. Maybe you were sent to your room for that. Maybe you were criticized or laughed at for that. Another place where you learn this dance is by observing your caregivers, mom, dad, parents, people that were important to you, who avoided hard conversations or prioritized being nice or agreeable over authenticity and honesty. In other words, the model that you had when you looked at people that you learned to reflect and live your life after, that's how they lived their lives. They were afraid of conflict. In third place, by internalizing cultural or religious messages. And we get them all the times in the culture and in the church that equates peace with compliance, virtue with conformity. That's a big one, isn't it? If you're really virtuous in our culture today, what do? You just conform with everything the culture is telling you. And what do? Well, I don't want to be rejected, I don't want to be canceled, so what do? We just conform, or we're silent. And it confuses love with not causing conflict. Boy, if you really love that person, you're not going to tell them what's true or what's real or what you think. Why? Because you might hurt their feelings, they might disagree with you, so love means that you're just nice. That's where we learn conflict avoidance. Now, how will the influence of these three places shape a couple's marriage? Well, a conflict-avoiding couple will, first of all, have difficulty recognizing and expressing their own needs and desires. They have trouble understanding or communicating what they truly want. Why? Because it's never been safe to think about or to acknowledge or to share what they truly wanted. Does your wife ever ask you, what do you really want? And it's like, I don't know. Or do you ask your wife, one of the most frustrating things I had with my wife after we first got married was, Joy, what's wrong? What do you want? I don't know. And two things, that she either didn't know them or she was afraid to share them with me. Why? Where did she learn them? Because in her home, you had to comply to everything or you were bad and shamed. And so she never learned what she really longed for, and then when she did understand what she wanted, she was afraid to share it. And that was a very frustrating thing to me. So I would just give up, and what it told me, how I communicated, how I interpreted it, and this is what she meant, was, well, she just doesn't want to be close to me. So guess what? I'd be mad and walk away. What does that do to a connection in a marriage? It doesn't connect it, does it? Second, how these three places will influence a marriage is that they will avoid honest communication to maintain peace. They fear conflict and avoiding sharing frustrations or disappointments, leading to the suppression of those emotions. They're all there bottled up on the inside. And to go along with all of this, they fear rejection or abandonment. I can't share them with you because I'm afraid that if I do, you'll reject me or you'll abandon me. They worry that expressing disagreement will lead to criticism or shame. And so what do? They avoid confrontation, flight over fight. You heard of the fight and flight response? I'm not going to fight, what I'm going to do? I'm going to run away. Rather than engaging with each other, they withdraw from each other, avoiding difficult conversations and uncomfortable emotions. Guys, do you see your marriage here? If so, you're a conflict avoider. That's the dance you're doing. And the end result is that you have unresolved resentment. As issues go unaddressed, resentment builds, creating emotional distance and leading to relational disconnection. And again, what's the end result? Where is this all taking you? Well, conflict-avoiding couples rarely talk honestly about deep longings, disappointments, or frustrations in their marriage. They avoid disconnecting issues that need repair by focusing on idealistic goals, meaningless pursuits, shallow issues. You know, what do the kids need for this? What do they need for school? You know, how can we serve at church? All those are important, but you use those to focus on in order to what? Hide from the real deeper issues. They work hard to create a Disneyland experience. And what's a Disneyland marriage? Ever go to Disneyland? It's always clean and perfect there, isn't it? Why? Because they got people always going around sweeping up every little, piece of paper that falls down. And so they work hard to create this Disneyland marriage that looks happy on the outside by keeping all of life's emotional trash swept clean on the inside. And they are slowly preparing their hearts for what? An affair, and a lot of times not even realizing it. Their unaddressed disconnection make them ripe for an outside emotional connection with another person. And guys, remember the three-legged stool. If circumstances align, and what are they? A prepared heart, a willing partner, and time and opportunity, what's going to happen? An affair will happen. You say, well, my wife and I are far from conflict avoiders. That's not us at all. That's not our family. We have a loud family. Well, what's the second dance? Maybe that one applies to you. Come back in 5 minutes and we'll talk about that dance. Okay? Again, what are you taking away so far? What are you hearing me say? What are you hearing me say, guys? Anybody?
Can't avoid it.
You can't avoid? You can't say that's not going to happen to me, so I don't have to worry about that. Usually what I find is guys that say that, they're in the most danger of having an affair because it'll really sneak up on them then. What else?
Being intentional about your marriage is important.
Yeah. It's not being intentional about not, doing this. It's not about the desire for another woman. I mean, that's the symptom, but the real issue is the connection that you have with your spouse. And let me just say one more thing that I should have put, a fifth thing that patterns that I've noticed over the years in working with couples, and that is, and this will make sense, a fifth thing would have been and I'll just say it's the man who had the affair for our sake. The man who has the affair, one of the hardest things for him will not only be not to humble himself before his wife, but it will also be to let go of the other woman. And you know why that is? Because an affair, unlike porn or if guys go to prostitutes and all this, an affair, there is an emotional connection to it. Why? Because I'm looking for an emotional connection with my wife. I'm not getting that. I was made for that. That's what marriage is for. I need it. I might not even know what that is. Here's somebody, a willing partner, and I'm having this emotional connection. It's only a matter of time where you end up in bed together. Time and opportunity. So, and that's one of the hardest things for the wife, because it's not that he just wants to come back, but he's having a hard time coming back because the emotional connection that belonged in the marriage has been transferred over here, but now he wants to come back, but guess what doesn't let go really easy? The emotional connection. That's why it is so crazy when you're working with couples that have had that affair. And it's painful, it's hard. And the thing that here's another thing I've learned, is that the thing that the man has longed for, the spouse has longed for in the marriage, this is what he's experiencing here. So one of the things that you do is you find out what is it that you are experiencing here that really caused you to be connected with the other person. That's what you've longed for with your spouse. Another thing I've learned too, it's while a spouse they'll both be experiencing this chronic disconnection, the spouse that typically has the affair is the one who is most frustrated with the disconnection. The other person who's okay with it, they don't mind it, they can just go on. The person that's more frustrated, they don't like it, they will typically have the affair. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But just a couple of those things. And again, the idea of that emotional connection that was meant with your wife, it will go over to the other person. Now, if you're just an addict and you're just using people to get off on, then you won't have that emotional connection. A lot of times a one-night stand, you meet the woman, this happens, that's more of something that isn't about emotion. Sometimes that's about revenge. I'm angry at my wife, so I'm going to have an affair. And then somehow, if it's going to really make her pay for her being the wife that she hasn't been to me, then somehow she's got to find out that I had it. Because you can have an affair for revenge, and if you don't, your wife doesn't find out, then what? It's not revenge. So, well, let's look at the second one. The first undercurrent of the two dances was the dance of the what? Conflict avoiders. And if that's not you, then these are the two general categories. They are the intimacy avoiders. Now, what's that? Well, intimacy avoiders, different than conflict avoiders, are couples who fear emotional vulnerability and closeness. They don't fear conflict, they fear getting close. They're more comfortable with tension than tenderness. They're more comfortable with conflict than with openness. They're drawn to conflict as a way to keep emotional distance. It works for them. Keep them safe. They're often mistaken for being passionate people when really they're emotionally guarded. Why are they this way? Well, intimacy avoiders learned early on in life, in childhood, that closeness leads to pain, disappointment, or rejection. When I get close to somebody, and it feels good to be close, something bad would happen. So I begin to associate closeness with what? Hurt, harm, danger. Emotional vulnerability was unsafe or discouraged in their family of origin. You gotta be tough. They associate intimacy with loss of control or weakness. They believe conflict is a safer place to live than closeness. Why? Because when you're open and close, you're what? Again, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to what somebody could do to you. Now, what's beneath the conflict? A deep fear of being truly seen and possibly rejected. And so I will keep you from seeing me by always having conflict between us. Conflict is the fig leaf that you use to hide yourself. What's beneath the conflict? A longing for connection buried under layers of self-protection. They still long for connection, but since connection is so scary, I gotta just keep piling things over to convince myself, why would I want to have a close relationship with that person when they're such an awful person, or they don't treat me well? So they're always looking to find fault, always looking to create a fight. What's beneath the conflict? Unhealed emotional wounds that make closeness feel dangerous and threatening. And also beneath it is a hope for intimacy, but no clear path to get there without feeling exposed. In other words, I want to be close, but I don't know how to get it without putting myself in a place where I'm going to be shot at. So I don't want to be shot at, I don't want to be criticized, I don't want to be shamed, I don't want to be hurt, I don't want to be threatened, so it's better just to hide behind the conflict that I somehow create. Now, where did intimacy avoiders learn this dance? Where do you think, guys? Where? At home, yeah. From their families of origin. Their childhood shaped the way they relate in adulthood. Home was often chaotic or emotionally volatile. Maybe dad was an alcoholic or other things were going on. They were busy. There was a lot of stress and pressure, and there was a lot of yelling and rage and unpredictable behavior. Those are all common parts of that. Conflict was often followed by affection. In other words, there would be a big fight, and then they would make up for the fight. Big fight, make up, blow up, make up, blow up, make up. And that became a pattern. And a lot of times the person that would blow up, maybe it was dad, would feel guilty, so what he would do? Oh, I feel guilt, so I got to make up, and I'll buy you something. And so that pattern made love feel confusing, because how can my dad or my mom or my family love me when they're always doing this to me? They love me, but they're doing this to me. I'm confused about what? I'm confused about love. Vulnerability felt unsafe. Being open often led to hurt. So closeness became something to fear. I have a little article that I wrote for our marriage retreats. It's called The Dilemma of Feeling Good in Marriage. And that's the same thing. A lot of times couples will feel very disconnected before they come on a marriage retreat. At the end of the retreat, they'll feel very connected, and it feels good and wonderful and fine. It's like, man, we needed this marriage retreat all our lives. We finally found something that connected us. That next week, they'll have the biggest fight in their life. And it's like, oh, you didn't mean any of that. And I'll tell them I wrote this so that when they read it, when they have that big fight that next week, that they know to expect that. Why? Because this is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I long for. And man, over the weekend it felt safe and it felt good, but now that Monday comes, this doesn't feel so, it feels good, but it doesn't feel so safe. So what do I got to do? I got to protect myself from feeling good. Because when you feel good, bad things happen. So what do? I pick a fight. And now I feel safe in my marriage again. Isn't that crazy? But that's how we're wired, guys. That's what we do. They've learned to stay guarded in their marriage. Emotional distance felt safer from being close and exposed. They learned to stay guarded as kids, and they bring that over into adulthood. Why? Because it works. We do what works. They became emotionally self-reliant. Trusting others felt risky, so they learned to depend only on themselves. I don't know what my needs are. I'm not going to tell you what my needs are. Whatever it is, I'll take care of myself. Intimacy got associated with danger. There's a saying that goes, what fires together, wires together. When the brain fires, all the synapses in the brain fire together, there's part of them that says, oh, this is good. And at the same time, something is happening. Closeness is good. Oh, closeness is dangerous. What fires together, wires together, so that the brain links closeness with pain, making true emotional connection feel too scary to tolerate. Now, where will this dance ultimately lead a couple? Well, closeness remains off limits. They never get really that close. They're passionate. And so they'll have times of passion, but the times of that close, open passion is scary, so they become passionate by getting big and angry, and that then allows them to stay safe. Because intimacy avoiders fear vulnerability, they won't address it, and the real connection never develops. Conflict becomes their only form of emotional connection. They're made to be emotionally connected, but they never do in a deep, life-giving way, so the only connection that they have, emotional connection, is conflict. Conflict is the only space where strong feelings are expressed, making chaos feel more intimate than calm. They actually feel closer together as a couple when they have a fight than when they're at peace with each other. Because when they're at peace with each other, guess what? They're guarded. When they're angry at each other, they're having all these emotions, and they're experiencing at least some kind of connection, emotional connection. Unspoken pain and unmet needs quietly accumulate. You see how it's happening over the years? Each unresolved fight adds another layer of emotional distance and discontent. Their hearts are slowly being prepared for an affair. The ongoing pattern of guardedness and the conflict that makes them increasingly vulnerable to outside emotional connection. Notice, I want connection, but connection is dangerous. So I don't have it here, and I begin to look outside. And if the three circumstances align, the three-legged stool comes together, prepared heart, a willing partner, and time and opportunity, guess what will happen? An affair will happen. And the guy that got up this morning, whose heart has been prepared, and the other two legs and he gets up this morning and thinks, I'll never have an affair. I'm not looking for an affair. But his heart has been prepared. There's one leg of the stool there. And he goes someplace, and there's a woman who's a willing partner, and there's time and opportunity. Guess what he'll do before the end of the night, or maybe the next day? Have an affair. What I want you to see, and this is what's so important, guys, you can have a prepared heart here today. Again, never have an affair. But if you have a prepared heart, that's one leg of the stool. And the only thing that will be keeping you from having an affair, because when it happens, it is big and powerful and it'll suck you right in, is you're still missing the two legs. But those two legs, if they come together with the third, you're in a dangerous spot. So then, while every marriage goes through seasons of disconnection, an affair is symptomatic of chronic marital disconnection, a long-standing pattern of emotional and relational distance. It's driven by two powerful undercurrents. What are they? Unhealthy relational patterns, two common marital dances. Conflict avoiders keep the peace by hiding their true feelings to avoid disagreement, while intimacy avoiders create conflict to dodge closeness, keeping vulnerability out of reach. What's the second undercurrent? The second undercurrent are unresolved relational deficiencies. And these, as I said, manifest themselves in 5 core marital needs that because of the relational dance, the marital dance, these 5 needs go unaddressed. So the question is, what are these needs, these 5 needs that go unaddressed? Well, first of all, let's talk about marriage as a need-meeting relationship. God created marriage. He created your marriage so that you as a man can meet needs that your wife has. And He created marriage so that you, with your wife, can have needs met through her. Marriage is a need-meeting relationship. It doesn't exist just to be independent. It exists to meet certain needs. And husbands and wives were designed to uniquely meet specific physical, emotional, and social needs for each other that God chose not to directly meet Himself. In other words, God meets all our needs, but there are certain needs that God gave us a spouse, that God, through our spouse, will indirectly meet that need, but He uses our spouse to directly meet that need. And there are relational needs that we have as men and women. There are emotional needs that we have, and there are social needs that we have that only marriage was designed and created to meet. Okay? It can't be met outside marriage. Now, meeting each other's needs flows from a healthy relational connection. When there's a healthy connection, guess what happens? Those 5 core needs get met. And this healthy relational connection, guys, as I have here, is rooted in covenantal love, marked by 4 things: priority and permanence. That's Genesis 2, leave, cleave, one flesh, leave, priority, cleave, permanence, one flesh, intimacy. And to have that permanence and that priority, when you have that, there will be a sense of vulnerability. When I know my marriage is the priority relationship between me and my wife, and when I know it's a permanent thing, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to begin to open up. And there will be vulnerability, and when I am vulnerable with my wife and she is vulnerable with me, guess what we develop? Trust with each other. And without trust, there cannot be this life-giving connection. But to have trust, you need vulnerability. But to have vulnerability, you need this covenantal love that is marked by priority and permanence. Your wife needs to know that she's the priority, that your marriage is the priority over all the relationships, and that you're not going anywhere, and you'll always be there. And you need to know that from her. That opens the door to vulnerability. That opens the door to trust. And when you have vulnerability and trust, you have one flesh, a life-giving connection. Now, mutually meeting each other's needs is part of God's good design for marriage. We are to give in marriage, and we are to receive in our marriages. It's not just the man giving, giving, giving. And it's not just the man getting, getting, getting. It's a mutual giving and receiving. Now note, when a couple is chronically disconnected, it will expose their marriage to certain relational deficiencies. Relational needs that were meant to be only met indirectly by God, but directly through your spouse, through the marriage. And when you have that deficiency or that chronic disconnection, 5 relational deficiencies will emerge. God specifically equipped marriage to meet as a part of His provision for human flourishing, and when ignored, will gradually weaken the marital bond between husband and wife. As time passes, when these needs aren't met, these deficiencies leave each spouse feeling unseen, unheard, and unloved, and the trust and intimacy is eroded, the trust and vulnerability goes away, and the couple slips into daily rhythms, not redemptive rhythms, but daily rhythms marked by avoidance, resentment, and isolation. Avoidance, resentment, isolation. Avoidance, resentment, isolation. It gets deeper and deeper. And guys, what it does is it creates a door in the marriage for an affair. What you need to know is that when there is chronic disconnection, each of you are dancing to this step. You both contribute equally but differently to the condition of the marriage. And when your marriage is chronically disconnected, together you create a door for an affair to happen. Again, it doesn't mean an affair will happen, it just means there's a door there. And your heart has been prepared. And if there is a willing partner, and if there is time and opportunity, one of those spouses will do what? They will open the door and walk through. Now, the person that opens the door and walks through, they are responsible for their decision to have the affair. But that door is symptomatic of a relationship, of a dance, of a relationship that both of you have created. And if an affair is going to be healed, the person that walks through the door has to take responsibility for his decision. It's solely his responsibility. But if that's just a symptom of the problem in the marriage, both have to take responsibility for the problem in the marriage, the disconnect that's there. Now, what are these relational deficiencies that create a door in the marriage for an affair to happen? There are 5, as I said. First one is attention deficiency. Within the heart of every husband and wife is God-given longing to be known, loved, and valued by the other, right? That's true for every human being, male or female. It might look differently between a man and a woman, but it's all there. When a marriage becomes chronically disconnected, it creates an attention deficiency, leaving spouses feeling what? Unseen, unheard, and unloved. And when you feel unseen, unheard, and unloved in your marriage, you will become strangers living under the same roof. Maybe sharing kids together, maybe sharing a ministry together, but nonetheless, not allies together on the journey, but strangers. The second one is acceptance deficiency. Every spouse has the legitimate need to feel fully accepted by the other person. We all long to be accepted by each other, but especially we long to feel accepted by the person close to us, the most important person in our lives, our spouse. What we long to feel accepted by is for who we are, what we believe, and how we feel. And who we are, what we believe, and how we feel is going to be unique to us, and it will be different from our spouse. And when we feel accepted by our spouse or by others for who we are, what we believe, what we feel, what we tell ourselves intuitively is this: it's okay to be me. It's okay to be someone different than you. Now, conversely, when acceptance is missing in a marriage, it creates an acceptance deficiency, where both spouses feel judged, insecure, and unwanted. And instead of feeling it's okay to be me, it's okay to be different than you, what they feel is, and here is, that it's not okay to be you, it's not okay to be different from me. And guess where typically they heard that? Growing up. It's not okay for you to have different thoughts, different opinions, different beliefs than me, your dad, your mom. It's not okay to be you. It's not okay to be different. And guys, what we need to remember is it's healthy. The one flesh doesn't mean you disappear. You're still the same you. Your wife is still the same her. You're still individuals, but now you share a connection together, a relationship together, a specific sacred relationship like none other. The two are still two separate, but they become one. The third need, affection deficiency. God designed marriage for physical closeness. We're not just spirit beings that have a body. We're embodied souls. We're in soul bodies. Our body is really important to us. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians that we shouldn't be involved in sexual immorality. Why? Because two reasons. He says the body is going to go on into God's new kingdom, the new creation, and the body belongs to the Lord. The body is not something going to be thrown away. It's important. It's going to be raised from the dead new and with newness of life. No longer energized by the flesh, but now energized totally and fully by the Spirit. But what I want you to see is that God designed marriage for physical closeness. Every husband and wife has the built-in need to be physically touched, to be held, to be kissed, to be caressed, to be embraced physically. And every husband and wife is wired to feel emotionally connected to their spouse through physical touch and loving affection. Emotional connection happens through physical connection. When chronic disconnection becomes the norm in a marriage, physical distance becomes the rule and an affection deficiency grows in its place. Fourth, an admiration deficiency. Ephesians 5:33 says, "Let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let his wife see that she respects her husband." How many of you heard this before? How many of you maybe even heard of the book or maybe been to the seminar, The Love and Respect? Right? Husbands long for respect, wives long to be loved. Husbands, love your wives, wives, respect your husbands. Why is that? I think it's because how God made men and women. Men were made to reflect God's power and strength. What does power and strength long for? Respect. God made women to reflect His beauty and His warmth and His grace. Guess what beauty, warmth, and grace longs for? to be loved, to be embraced. Men long for respect because of how they've been designed, uniquely as men. Women long to be uniquely loved because of how God has designed women to be as women, to reflect Him. Doesn't mean women don't long for respect or men don't long for love, but acutely, this is what men long for, and acutely, women long for love. Now, love and respect are two core emotional needs in marriage. Everyone needs love and respect. Men need love and respect. That is deeper longing. Women have a deeper longing to be loved and close. Love and respect are both forms of admiration. When my wife respects my strength, there's a sense of admiration. When a man respects his wife's beauty, or loves his wife's beauty, there is a what? Sense of admiration. That's just so wonderful. Admiration meets the deep human need to be delighted in and to be valued. All of us long to come into a room and see the eyes of another person open up wide with like, Pat, you're here. You know? Tom, you're here. What we don't want is come into a room and they say, Matt, you're here. You know, we don't. That's eyes of disgust. We all long to be delighted in. We all long to be valued. Shanti Feldman said, a woman doesn't just want to be cared for, she longs to be cherished and admired by her husband. She needs to know that he truly sees her, delights in her presence, and values her not just for what she does, but for who she is at her core, and I would add, as a woman. Maribel Morgan says this, admiration is what motivates a man to be responsible and to succeed in his ambitions. It motivates him to be a man, is what she's saying. Admiration can put back the step in a husband's walk, a sparkle in his eyes, and the flutter in his heart. He will dare to dream again and believe in his abilities when his wife tells him that she does. Now, an admiration deficiency takes root in our marriages when chronic disconnection moves us as a couple to stop noticing and appreciating each other. When that happens, compliments disappear. We don't affirm each other's strengths or appearances or efforts anymore. Efforts go unnoticed. You know, we don't acknowledge their work, their parenting, acts of service. They're not appreciated, they're not expected. Negative talk begins to outweigh positive talk. Criticism becomes more common than encouragement. Interests fade. Interest in each other fades. Little curiosity about each other, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're desiring, what their dreams are. You see where all this is going? Just kind of like going down a vortex. And value of each other diminishes. One or both begin to feel like their presence, opinions, or contributions no longer matter to the other. And let me just say this, when that happens, when you don't feel like you matter and what you give or do matters to your spouse anymore, your heart has been prepared. Your heart has been prepared. And you're going to look for somebody, unknowingly, you're going to be drawn for somebody that does what? It's going to see that you have something to give. It's going to see that you got something to say. Adventure deficiency. God created marriage to be a grand adventure together through life. I like this paraphrase. Genesis 1:28. God blessed them. This is after He created Adam and Eve, and now He's going to say, this is what I made you as a couple for. You to go as one flesh, but you got a purpose. It isn't just to stay and enjoy each other, but you have a purpose as you enjoy each other. God blessed them and said, step into this grand adventure. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth with life. Take charge of this world that I've made. Lead, nurture, and cultivate all that's in it, from the creatures in the sea to the birds in the sky to every living thing on the ground. You're made not only to enjoy each other, but you are made for a grand adventure. There's a transcendent purpose that I have you. And you're to go out and take what I've made and expand it. You're not only intimate together, but you are allies together. I have put you on a grand adventure as a couple. Genesis says that God designed marriage to be a dynamic, all-encompassing relationship meant to deeply engage, shape, and transform every aspect of the couple's world. Guys, when you see marriage like that, man, it becomes a whole different way of seeing life. So here's my question. What happens to the grand adventure of marriage when couples become chronically disconnected? Don't seem like much of a grand adventure, does it? Sometimes it can seem more like a life sentence. The grand adventure, a lot of times, will slip into a flat, uneventful, lifeless journey, characterized by a loss of shared purpose, stagnation, the marriage becomes routine, uninspiring, boring, predictable, loss of intimacy, emotional, physical, spiritual, relational closeness diminishes, tension increases, misunderstandings and conflict become the norm in your life, and isolation and loneliness sets in. Spouses begin to feel alone in the relationship. And again, when you feel alone, you feel disconnected, and knowing that you were made for connection, and it was made to be experienced where? In marriage. And you begin to feel like, this is the wrong person, I married the wrong person, I'll just kind of suck it up, because I'm going to be a good man, I'm going to be a good Christian. But your heart has been prepared. You see, just to sit back and say, well, I married the wrong person, so you're living with a prepared heart. It's ripe for an affair. What does that mean you should do? Well, it doesn't mean that you should just be passive and accept I married the wrong person. What does it mean? It means that you have to begin to turn towards your wife and say, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to begin the rest of my life, even if it never goes anywhere, I'm going to begin to seek to develop a life-giving connection. And I don't have to figure it out on my own, because this is what God wants, this is what He's made me for, and this is what He's partnering with me in this world to do. And so then, what is an affair, guys? It's a sinful moral choice made in a moment that is fueled by a heart slowly prepared for years. It's a heart that was made for connection, but a heart that's been devoid of connection. It's a symptom of a couple's slow relational drift into long-standing chronic disconnection. And it's driven by two powerful, unnoticed undercurrents within the marriage: unhealthy relational patterns and unresolved relational deficiencies. These first undercurrent, the patterns manifest themselves in two dances. Conflict avoiders. They grew up believing conflict was bad, so they learned to use niceness and business to avoid it. They got a nice marriage, but doesn't feel very life-giving. Then there are intimacy avoiders. They grew up believing intimacy was dangerous, so they learned to use conflict and anger to escape it. And one is not better than the other. The other is a lot more difficult to deal with, the intimacy avoiders, but the conflict avoiders, it's because it's nice. But they both entrap a marriage in chronic disconnection, which in turn give rise to relational deficiencies. And what were these relational deficiencies? There are 5 of them. Attention deficiency, acceptance, affection, admiration, and adventure. These 5 deficiencies erode trust, vulnerability, and intimacy in marriage. They deepen the marital disconnection, and they create an unseen door for an affair in the marriage to happen. All this leaves us with a prepared heart. We're not looking for an affair necessarily, but our heart has been unknowingly prepared. And if we run into a willing partner, and there is time and opportunity, in other words, all 3 of those legs of the stool appear, guess what will happen? You'll wake up in the morning not looking to have an affair, but by the time you go to bed at night, you will have opened the door and walked through and had an affair. That's how quickly and easily they happen. You know, God had blessed David, and David's kingdom was flourishing, and he got up one morning not looking for an affair, not expecting to have an affair. He was faithful to God, and he looked, and he saw something, an innocent moment. He saw something, and instead of walking away, there's something that caused him to stay. And it wasn't just the sexual temptation. There was something that had been going on in David's heart prior to that. His relationship with his spouse, his wife, and probably even with God. And his heart had been prepared. And by the time he went to bed that night, he'd committed adultery. And to cover it, he needed to do what? He needed to commit murder. Affairs are destructive, and they have rippling effects. And by God's grace, I've seen some couples really be healed. But it takes time, it takes hard work, and it takes perseverance. You gotta want to be restored. I've experienced some couples where they try for a little while and then they just say it's too much and they go back to the dance because it's what they know. And they just have that affair just there that one will use as a trump card to keep the other one in line. And then there are those that it's just too big and too much. And they leave each other. But because it's caused by an affair, man, it just follows you. So here's our closing question. We want to avoid an affair at all costs. And it is possible. But if an affair is symptomatic not of lust but of chronic disconnection, then affair-proofing our marriage isn't about controlling sexual desire for another woman, but restoring a relational connection with our spouse. If that's really the key, then how do we do that? How do we begin to learn to dance a different dance? One that doesn't contribute to chronic disconnection, but one that begins to invite deep, heart-level connection. Guys, that's the only way to affair-proof our marriage. And it is possible. It is possible. Mark shared earlier that he and been around for a while. And he shared this publicly, so I know I can share it. He and his wife were my first couple as a professional therapist. I was kind of learning with Mark and Linda. And Mark, because his marriage there was a disconnect, Mark didn't know how to connect. Mark's heart was prepared. He didn't have an affair, but like mine at one time, his also was prepared. The thing that I have appreciated about Mark, he didn't know what to do, but he knew that he needed to do something. And Mark worked hard over the years, persevering and learning and frustration and humbling himself and confessing and being honest with Linda. And Mark has come to have that redemptive pattern. Guys, it is possible. Mark has experienced it, I've experienced it, and you can experience it. How do you do that? Well, unfortunately, the way the schedule is, it won't be till September 13th that I'm going to talk about it. So something that you can do, though, guys, prior to that, is a lot of this is having an awareness of ourselves. What's really going on in our lives below the surface? And we live in a culture and we grew up in families where we're taught not to be aware of that. We're taught just to skip over that, to close our eyes to it, to be indifferent to it. One of the things that a Story Weekend does, one of the things that a Coram Deo group does, is it helps us become aware of our relational style. It helps us become aware of how we are not giving our spouses what we're supposed to be given in terms of those needs that need to be met, and where we are deficient. And how then to begin to talk about that with each other, because we've never had the opportunity to talk about it with anybody, let alone our spouse. So it begins with talking with each other, other men, other brothers. They can then encourage you and guide you to begin to pursue your wife in a way that encourages connection rather than discourages it. So if you're part of a group like that, praise God and stay at it. If you're not, Randy is here somewhere, Mark is here, talk with them and they can get you connected. Any questions, comments before we close? What is my recommendation where one couple is not interested in intimacy? I think you honor that. You don't try to force it. I just had a reverb. I think you honor that. You don't try to force them to have that, but you still continue to pursue it. In other words, you don't. If they're resistant here, you don't say, "Well, I'm gonna break this. You're gonna like this if you want." What you do is you push up to that resistance, and you honor that resistance. What you're telling them is it's okay to be you. If you're going to say, "Well, you're going to have intimacy whether you like it or not," then you're not telling them they can be different. So you come up to this and you just live as a man, inviting that, learning how to do that, and it will be different for your wife than another wife, and that's part of the process of learning. It's part of the process of walking with Jesus. It's the part of the process of growing, of trusting God with your hurts and your pains and your frustrations. But it is never saying, because my wife doesn't want that, I am then free to just live my own life how I want to. So it may be this: she may never put that wall down all your life. And what God is wanting you to do is be the man that reflects Him. And what does God do? God always speaks and moves with strength and power, but with grace and kindness in order to open the person to us. He does that with you, me, others. And He wants us to do that with our wives as well. So honor where she's at. Meet her, come up to that point where you feel the resistance, and just live there, knowing that it will be hard, and disappointing, but it's where you learn to trust God. It's where you learn to be vulnerable with her and share with her your thoughts and longings. And know this too, vulnerability begets vulnerability. As you are more open and vulnerable with your wife, that invites her to open herself up to you as well. So, Dale.
Want to follow up? So you do what you're just saying, and obviously your needs, the deficiencies that happen, this will happen. How do you deal with that? How do you keep your heart not open or whatever? I don't remember exactly the way you phrased it, but your heart.
How do you keep your heart from closing?
Well, from opening, from being at that door where the right person shows up and time is there. Your heart is going to be hurt by that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that hurt? If God does it through the wife, if the wife's not playing, what do you do with that?
Well, I think if you're dealing with it like we're talking about here, there's an awareness. So you're already aware of the longing, you're aware of the disappointment, and and if you got other people in your lives, now what do you do with that disappointment? You're able to grieve what you're not getting, what you were meant to get. And so rather than seeking to fulfill it in an illegitimate way, you're emotionally grieving with other people, appropriate people to grieve with over what you were made for, but what this relationship is denying you. Now that doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable, but it does mean that you're recognizing what the danger is, and you're dealing with it in the appropriate way, not by just pushing it down and pretending, well, I'll just, push on for Jesus. It's, I need relationship, and so I will talk about what I'm not getting here, and I'll get it in a different way, not fully as I was meant to get it from my wife, from other men. You don't get it from other women, guys, unless it's an 85-year-old woman, and you're not 85. Anyone else? Yeah, let's go here, then we'll go here.
I might be jumping ahead, but I'm curious to, with our stories, how they might connect. Like, if she knew my story and I knew her story, is that something of a good way to look into it, or is that just jumping ahead of the process?
No, I think part of healing in a marriage is understanding each other's stories and how your stories are colliding together. And usually what happens too, guys, is if you're a conflict avoider, you'll typically marry a conflict avoider. You don't have to say, how did you grow up? Were you a conflict avoider? Oh, I am too, let's get married. You feel comfortable with a person like that. It feels like home. And so you're always drawn, the people that you pick to marry will feel like home. If you grow up in a intimacy avoiding house where there's a lot of noise and loudness and passion and all that, you'll be drawn to that. But I think sooner or later, to grow as a couple, you got to know each other, and part of that is knowing each other's stories, because it's not just to know how they collide, but know this is what you need as my wife that you never got, that if I change here and stop acting like everybody in your family grew up, or I need to change, that change is going to bring healing to that part of your heart that was broken. And where the woman would need to change, whether she married you or not, it's part of what she needs to change in terms of becoming more like Jesus. That change isn't an end in itself. It's a means to an end, which that your change would bring about healing in your wife's heart, something that she would never got, or your heart as well. So yeah, it's important that you know each other's stories, and not to judge each other, but to better console and care for each other. Anyone else? Let's see, over here.
Yeah, just thinking about waiting for what we can learn in September about how to start a new dance. One of the takeaways you just talked about was work on your self-awareness. What other tips can you give us until we can learn good stuff in September?
Slow down. Like I said, our culture is made not to slow down, made to not know ourselves. Calvin said, if you want to know God, you got to know yourself, and if it's not until you know yourself will you know God. So they're both equal. So one of the things, just real practically, to do is as you drive, instead of listening to a podcast, even though it might be a good podcast, just leave the music off, just drive in silence, and just be curious about what you think, where your mind goes. That's one thing you can do. Another thing is you can begin to journal. And by journaling, I don't mean, write a big thing. Journaling is just bullet point. What did I feel today? What am I thinking today? And it's just beginning to notice feelings and emotions. And a lot of times we don't know those until we begin to slow down. I was talking to a pastor the other day, and he was wanting, just tell me what I need to do in order to have spiritual formation. Maybe what you can do is you can just teach me what to do. And I said, no, to teach you what to do is really, there are three things for spiritual formation, for growth in Christ. Slowing, sitting, and surrendering. Slowing, we slow down to notice. To notice what? Notice our bodies, because our emotions live in our bodies. So, do I have a stiff neck? Well, what's that stiff neck about? Is there emotion that's connected to it? Yeah, I'm feeling stress, and when I feel stress, I get a stiff neck. Well, what am I feeling stress about? And it's just noticing, not to judge, just to be curious, just to notice. That's the slowing. The sitting is once I begin to notice emotions and feelings, like I was really mad at my wife for this. Why? You sit with that and you say, it made me feel like she didn't respect me. Now, it may not be true, it may be just how I interpreted it, but why did I feel disrespected because of this? Why this? Are there other areas? So you sit and you then just begin to be curious. And so what you're beginning to know is you're beginning to know what's going on. You really begin to understand the state of your soul. Because most of us don't understand the state of our soul. It takes a lot of work, and everything in our culture and even everything in the church encourages us to fill our heads with knowledge and ignore what's going on below the surface. And so once you then begin to understand the state of your soul by being curious, and again, not judgmental, I shouldn't be feeling those things. It's no, why am I feeling those things? And then once you begin to understand that, then you begin to say, okay, now what do I need to surrender so that my emotions, my longings, my desires begin to more align with God's? You know what? My reaction to this was I felt justified in being cold to my wife. That's not right. I want to surrender that reaction of being cold. And what would be a better reaction? Maybe it'd be just go to my wife and say, when you said this, it really made me feel disrespected. And I know that's not probably what you meant, but that hurt me, and I just want you to know that. Not to criticize, not to condemn, but it's better than being honest. It's better than being dishonest and not saying, but being passive aggressive, and now I'm going to begin to withdraw. So again, sitting, slowing, surrendering. And you do that every day. In fact, at the end of the day, that would be a good way to end the day. You sit. What happened in my life today? What do I notice? You slow, you sit. Why did that happen? How did that make me feel? How did I react? How did I cope? Surrender. Lord, what do I need to surrender to you? That would be a good way to end each day. Anyone else? Yeah, Steve.
Can you have a relationship that doesn't fall into an intimacy avoider or a conflict avoider, or they have to be one or the other?
No, I think this is just general, because there's some other ones. There's something called the split self dance, but these are kind of the two main ones, and everything else kind of comes off them. And if I think I might have mentioned it, if there's a sexual addiction, you know, that is something, and there's affairs out of a sexual addiction, that's something in addition to that. There's a different dance going on there as well. But these are the most common. Good question, though. Well, again, guys, one of my concerns about doing this, how we're doing it, just kind of 4 times a year, is that we'll lose the momentum. And so let me know. Give us your thoughts. Maybe you can email us and let us know how this is working for you, and maybe some ways that would make it, if we're going to keep this kind of a schedule, how we might do things that would help the momentum. Because I know between now and September is a long time, and what could we do to kind of keep things moving forward that might be helpful for you. So I would welcome that. You know, if you can just jot a email to us, I would greatly appreciate that. Okay? Well, we will see you next time, September. So have a great summer.